word is everywhere. Free market, market forces, the market decides, market value. Let the market sort it out. It is used in political speeches as though it were a force of nature, invoked in economic arguments as though it were a kind of God, appealed to in business decisions as though it were an impartial judge whose verdict, once delivered, cannot and should not be questioned. The market said so. That is the end of the conversation. But what is a market? Not in the textbook definition, not the clean diagram with supply curves and demand curves intersecting at a point called equilibrium. What is a market actually, in the world as it exists, as it functions, as it produces outcomes that land in real lives? Because the gap between the textbook and the reality is where most of the important things are happening. And the word market, used the way it is used, with the authority it is given, is doing enormous political and social work that becomes invisible when the word is treated as though it simply describes a natural phenomenon rather than a human arrangement with human origins and human consequences. So start at the beginning, before the theory, before the ideology, before the word itself. A market in its most basic form is just a meeting. Two people, or 10, or 10,000, who have different things and want different things, coming together in a space, physical or virtual or conceptual, to exchange. The farmer brings grain, the weaver brings cloth, the metal worker brings tools. They look at what each other has, they negotiate, they exchange, they leave with something different from what they arrived with. And if the exchange was voluntary, and both parties preferred what they received to what they gave, then something real has happened. Real value has moved. Both people, by their own assessment, are better off. This is the genuine insight at the heart of market thinking. Voluntary exchange creates value. Not in the sense that it creates things from nothing, but in the sense that it moves things to where they are more wanted. The grain was less useful sitting in the farmer's barn than it was in the weaver's kitchen. The cloth was less useful sitting in the weaver's workshop than it was on the farmer's back. The exchange did not create the grain or the cloth, but it created the alignment between what exists and where it is needed, and that alignment is genuinely valuable. This insight is real. It is not a trick of ideology. The spontaneous coordination of millions of individual decisions through price signals, the way markets aggregate dispersed information about what people want and what people have and translate that information into prices that guide production and distribution, is a genuine achievement. It is one of the most remarkable features of modern economic life. No central planner, however intelligent, has managed to coordinate economic activity at the scale and efficiency that markets achieve through their decentralized operation. Friedrich Hayek made this argument with great force, and it holds. The price system is an information system. When the price of copper rises, it signals throughout the entire economy to miners, manufacturers, engineers, consumers that copper is scarcer relative to demand, and millions of individual decisions respond to that signal without anyone directing them. People use less copper, substitutes are found, new sources are explored, the signal propagates and the response follows. No bureaucracy could manage this. The market does it continuously and automatically. So the market works. In this specific sense, as a mechanism for coordinating decentralized information through price, it works. The question is not whether it works. The question is what it works for, what it cannot do, and what it does to the things it touches that should not be touched in this way. Because a market is not neutral. It is not a frictionless mechanism that simply reflects underlying realities. It is an institution. It has rules. It has conditions. It produces particular kinds of outcomes and not others. And those rules, those conditions, those outcomes are not given by nature. They are made by people, enforced by power, and they consistently serve particular interests more than others. Start with the conditions. A market works well in the sense of allocating resources efficiently, under a specific set of conditions that economists call perfect competition. Many buyers, many sellers, no single participant large enough to influence prices, perfect information available to all participants. No externalities, meaning the costs and benefits of transactions, fall only on the parties to those transactions, and free entry and exit for producers. Under these conditions, the textbook results hold. Prices reflect true costs and benefits. Resources flow to their most valued uses. The outcome is efficient. Now look at the actual markets in the actual world and ask how many of those conditions are met. In most important markets, There are not many sellers of roughly equal size. There are a few very large ones and many small ones. The largest can influence prices. They have market power. The phone you're using was made by one of perhaps 3 companies that together control the vast majority of the global smartphone market. The search engine you used this morning was almost certainly Google, which processes more than 90% of global search queries. The social platform you checked was owned by a company that also owns the other main social platforms you use. These are not competitive markets, they are oligopolies or monopolies. And in those structures, the logic of the market, competition driving prices down to costs, efficiency rewarding producers alike, does not operate as the theory suggests. Information is not equally available to all participants. The bank knows more about your creditworthiness than you know about the bank's internal risk models. The insurance company knows more about actuarial statistics than the customer buying the policy. The used car dealer knows more about the car than the buyer. This asymmetry is not incidental. It is structural and it is exploited systematically. The party with more information consistently extracts more value from the transaction than the party with less. Markets with significant information asymmetry do not produce the efficient outcomes the theory predicts. They produce outcomes skewed toward the informed. And externalities are everywhere. Every transaction in a fossil fuel economy produces carbon emissions that are not priced into the transaction. The buyer and seller of a barrel of oil do not pay the cost of the emissions that burning that oil will produce. That cost is distributed across everyone who breathes air, across future generations who will inherit a warmer planet, across the communities in low-lying coastal areas, across the ecosystems that will be disrupted. The market transaction is completed. The price is set. And the actual full cost of the transaction is not in the price at all. It is borne by those who had no part in the exchange. This is the market's most significant structural failure, and it is the failure with the largest consequences. The market prices what is scarce and excludable, what can be owned, controlled, and charged for. It does not price what is common and non-excludable: clean air, stable climate, functioning ecosystems, social trust, public health. These things are real. They are valuable. In many cases, they are the foundation on which all other economic activity rests, and the market treats them as free inputs. It uses them without accounting for them, degrades them without compensating for them, and continues to report growth while the unpriced foundations of that growth are being eroded. The GDP of a country rises when a forest is clear-cut and the timber sold. It does not fall when the ecosystem services that forest provided, water regulation, carbon sequestration, biodiversity, flood prevention, are permanently lost. The market saw the timber. It did not see the forest. Now look at what markets do to things that should not be organized this way. There are domains of human life where the market logic, you get what you can pay for, is appropriate. You want a television. You have money. You exchange. Fine. The market serves you. But there are other domains where that logic produces outcomes that most people, if asked directly and honestly, would say are wrong. Healthcare. If you can pay for treatment, you receive it. If you cannot, you do not. In a pure market for healthcare, a child born to poor parents who develops a serious illness does not receive treatment because their parents cannot pay. That outcome is the market working correctly. It is allocating the resource to those who can pay for it. And most human beings, when confronted with that outcome directly, recognize it as a moral failure, not a market success. The efficiency of the allocation is beside the point when the allocation results in a child dying for want of care their parents could not afford. Education, housing, clean water, the legal system. These are domains where organizing access through the ability to pay consistently produces outcomes that the same people who defend free markets in other contexts tend to find troubling when confronted with their actual implications. The child who cannot afford good schooling begins life with a deficit that no amount of individual effort will fully overcome. The person who cannot afford legal representation, in a system where legal outcomes correlate strongly with quality of legal representation, is not receiving justice. They are receiving what they can pay for. The market does not know the difference between a domain where its logic is appropriate and a domain where it is not. It knows only what has a price and what does not. The decision about which domains should be organized through markets and which should be organized through other means, collective provision, public goods, rights that do not depend on ability to pay, is not a market decision. It is a political and moral one. And it is one that societies have answered very differently across time and place, and are always in the process of renegotiating. The claim that the market should decide, in its most expansive form, is not an economic argument. It is a political position dressed in the language of economic inevitability. It takes the genuine insight about markets, that voluntary exchange coordinates information efficiently, and extends it far beyond the domain where it applies, into areas where it produces outcomes that most people would reject if they saw them clearly for what they are. And it does this under the cover of a word, the market, that sounds neutral, impersonal, objective. As though the market were weather, as though its outcomes were natural rather than produced by specific rules, enforced by specific institutions, benefiting specific people and excluding specific others. A market is not weather. It is an institution. It was built. It is maintained. Its rules were written by people with interests. Different rules produce different outcomes. The question of which rules to have is always a question about who benefits and who bears the cost. Pretending otherwise, pretending that the market simply reflects reality rather than producing a particular version of it, is not economic neutrality. It is the most effective form of political argument, one that does not appear to be making an argument at all. Now, none of this means markets are simply bad and should be replaced. The coordination they achieve is real, and the alternatives that have been tried have produced their own enormous failures. The planned economies of the 20th century demonstrated with terrible clarity what happens when the price mechanism is entirely replaced by central direction. The information problem Hayek identified is real. The spontaneous coordination of markets is genuinely valuable and not easily replicated. But the honest position is not to choose between markets are good and markets are bad. The honest position is to see what markets actually are. Institutions with specific rules, working well under specific conditions, failing systematically under others, appropriate for some domains and deeply inappropriate for others, and to ask, in each case, what rules would produce outcomes that reflect what we actually value? Not what the market values. What we value, as people, as communities, as a species trying to live together on a finite planet. The market is a tool. An extraordinary and genuinely powerful tool. But a tool serves the person using it. And right now, in a great deal of the world, the relationship has been reversed. The tool is being treated as the authority. The market decides. That is the end of the argument. But the market is not an authority. It is a mechanism. And mechanisms answer to the purposes of those who build and operate them. Or they should. Taking that authority back, deciding consciously what the market should do and what it should not touch, is not anti-market. It is what it looks like to be an adult in relationship to a very powerful instrument. That is the seeing that changes the conversation, not rejection, not uncritical acceptance, honest understanding of what is actually there.